Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Nobody knows.
On November 12th, I and my constituents had the misfortune, and hundreds of families were ravaged by the crash of Flight 586. Within literally moments of that plane crash, the National Transportation Safety Board was on the ground, sequestering evidence, interviewing witnesses, subpoenaing information if necessary, and since then they have offered periodic reports. 1 month and a day earlier, when the World Trade Center collapsed, nothing could have been further from the truth. According to reports that we've heard since, there has been no comprehensive investigation. One expert in fire engineering concluded that there was virtually a non-existent investigation. We haven't examined any aspects of the collapse that might have impacted rescue worker procedures, even in this last month. Second, reports have emerged that crucial evidence has been mishandled. Over 80% of the steel from the World Trade Center site has already been sold for recycling. Much of it, if not all of it, before investigators and scientists can analyze the information. Third, we've allowed this investigation to become woefully bogged down in infighting and lack of cooperation among agencies. Researchers from FEMA did not get timely access to the designs of the building. News accounts have said there has been friction between engineers and FEMA because of concerns about where the information would wind up. Even the National Science Foundation, which was awarded grants to several scientists to study the collapse, but didn't coordinate these efforts with FEMA or the American Society of Civil Engineers. And finally, we have seen painfully that the financial commitment to this investigation simply is not there. It is not uncommon to spend tens of millions of dollars investigating why a plane crashed, but we've yet to spend even $1 million on this investigation, and the Bush administration has refused to commit to release the full funding necessary. But what difference does it make, some might ask? Who could have foreseen such a catastrophic event? Well, the same could be said, frankly, any time a plane crashes. Yet every time we learn about why one plane crashed, we save future people from being victims as well. We could learn what firefighters should know before they go into buildings. We should learn what families like Vincent and Demencia Ragusa, who are from my district, who lost their son, a firefighter who went into that building, unaware, as I'm sure many of us, as we were, that those buildings were about to go down. We can learn about future design of buildings, and perhaps as importantly, we might be able to revisit buildings that are currently standing and learn ways to make their occupants and firefighters safer. That is why I'm going to be introducing legislation to give the National Institutes of Standards and Technology similar line authorities that the National Transportation Safety Board has. Whether it's a plane crash or a building collapse, we must get to the truth. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We just heard testimony that the city was the opposite of cooperative, that they had refused to provide basic information. And the issue is when members of the panel signed a document agreeing not to sue, it's where you get off agreeing not to testify. You are public officials gathering information for the public. You don't own it. You don't have the ability to say, I won't use it here, I will use it there. You'll use it wherever we say you'll use it. If you come before us after looking at these blueprints and you decide that the Port Authority was at fault and you raise your right hand because the chairman asked you to, you're going to tell us, I don't care what you sign. The idea that, and this is a government agency, the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. It's not a foreign planet. It's not a private company. This is an organization that's funded with our taxpayer dollars, with our fees when we fly in and out of airports. The idea that they should demand that whatever information is collected should not be held against them, well, that's not, to me, being cooperative. And let's not kid ourselves. Whenever you asked for it, Mr. Wingo, you aren't going to get it unless the New York Times ran a story on Christmas Day. All right? Truth be told, that if a warrant for the fact that attention was called to this and bright light was shown on it, they would not have cooperated. To this day, I'd be surprised if you would have the blueprints that you needed. And to give you a sense of the importance of the blueprints so we all understand it, you know, if we're going to do an investigation of the strength or weaknesses of the trusses that firefighters speak so much about, well, you need the blueprints to find out where to even look, where you look in the rubble. And the idea that the city was cooperative, well, I'm not so sure. You know, the two things are not mutually exclusive. Recovering someone and examining the steel that might have been laying on top of them are not mutually exclusive. You can do that at Great Kills. You can do that on the truck before it's loaded onto the barge. You can do it on the barge. The idea that there was some level of cooperation, I have to tell you, the anecdotal record is replete with stories of people having cameras confiscated from them, being stopped at checkpoints. You're officials of the United States government. The idea that this should have to be a subject of a long negotiation over what information would be at your disposal, to me is most troubling.
And I just think there's so much that has been lost in these last 6 months that we can never go back and retrieve. And it's not only unfortunate, it's borderline criminal. I believe that conspiracy theorists are going to have a field day with this. They're going to make the Warren Commission look like a walk in the park. Can any one of you gentlemen tell me who was in charge of amassing the steel and other debris as a result from the attack of September 11th on the World Trade Center?
I'm not sure I understand fully your question.
In other words, what entity was in charge of collecting, selling, or was disposing of material within 2 weeks of the actual event, or was it prior to that?
It may have been prior to that. I'm not sure when the first decision was made on that, but I didn't find out. We didn't find out.
Were you disturbed by that? By finding that out? Were you disturbed to find out that the city was actually disposing of or selling off
we had
material?
previously indicated that we definitely wanted to see the steel and select
Did you or did FEMA or any other entity actually ask or tell the city of New York to cease and desist from disposing of that material?
As far as the team is concerned, we made it known that we needed steel, and I don't have any knowledge that anyone had the authority even to ask them to cease and desist.
So no one even asked them politely to stop selling, but in all likelihood could be evidence, Mr. But in all likelihood could be evidence, Mr. Anastani?
I believe I was the first one to find out that the steel is being recycled. New York Times reporter Jim Glantz told me 2 weeks after a collapse, and I tried to contact city, and also New York Times reporters tried to make sure we can have access to steel to do the research. It was not happening, and I went myself.
Professor Hassan Astane investigated Ground Zero 2 days after the attack. He sent CBS 5 photos of steel from Building 7 that he examined. He called any theory of explosives Complete nonsense. I didn't see any explosives, he told CBS 5. Just evidence of an intense fire. He says gravity brought the building down because the bottom collapsed. Members of
As regards the concave, the opposite concave faces, again, we see exactly that. One of them pushed inwards by the concussion of the explosion, and the other pushed inwards by the weld as it's been torn across.
So C-14 has one of its interesting features is this. Looks like a bullet went through there. I don't know if that's from being struck while standing or falling. Something with a lot of velocity went through there and flared that open.
9/11 was the greatest loss of life and property damage in U.S. fire history. This should have been the most protected, preserved, over-tested, and thorough investigation of a crime scene in world history. Sadly, it was not. What was it? Well, we know from their own admission, the majority of the evidence was destroyed. Like Richard said, 22 years of experience, I've seen a lot of crime scenes. I've never seen anything like this in my life. I was out at the site. I saw trucks leaving faster than anywhere I've ever seen, but I accepted it at the time, and for years I accepted it because it was a recovery and rescue operation, and that's normal to have something like that going. Again, we've never seen it.
As far as connections go, this 56th floor section did exactly what one would hope. Connections were stronger than the material being joined. But no evidence of bolts just simply popping.
Like it, but that was expected. What I didn't know for years, what was going on behind the scenes, was that evidence was being destroyed when it was shipped off. By their own admission, Tower 7 investigation, this investigation at Tower 7 had no physical evidence. How do you investigate a crime when you've destroyed all the evidence? It doesn't make sense.
And Bill Rosati, he was here when it all happened. He saw it for himself. Bill, if you can just tell us what you saw, what you heard.
I was standing like 2 blocks away, and all of a sudden I just seen a big flash, and then I seen the building coming down, and I just seen people just running everywhere, chaotic like.
So I was just standing there, we were watching the building actually because it was on fire. The bottom floors of the building were on fire, and we heard this sound that sounded like a clap of thunder. Turned around, we were shocked to see that the building was it looked like there was a shock wave ripping through the building, and the windows all busted out, and it was horrifying. And then about a second later, the bottom floor caves out, and the building followed after that, and we saw the building crash down all the way to the ground. We were in shock, and then the worst part about it, we saw the smoke and the plumes of smoke coming after us, and we had to run.
They also admit that they refused to test the explosives, or to test for explosives or residue of thermite. Now, this is what I'm going to go into here just real quickly, is there are national standards for an investigation. That's what all of us are asking for, an investigation that follows national standards and holds people accountable. This manual right here, just so you can see it, is what we call the kind of the Fire Investigation 101. This is the most basic fire investigation manual there. This is for the 2001 edition. This is what should have been referred to, at least. It doesn't have to be followed exactly, but it should have been used as a guideline for the investigation. I'm just going to cover a few of the things that are in here. So NIST violated, and the initial investigators that did not protect the scene violated the most basic of the guidelines. And I'm going to cover 5 of them here. One is the NFPA 9.3.6. It covers spoliation of evidence. Specifically what it reads is, once evidence has been removed from the scene, it should be maintained and not destroyed or altered until the investigation is complete. The steel was melted down prior to the investigation. We know that from their own admission. This is no conspiracy theory stuff. 19.2.4, exotic accelerants. If on the scene you find melted steel or concrete, you should consider the use of exotic accelerants. And they specifically say in the manual, thermite mixtures produce exceedingly hot fires that can account for melted steel and concrete. That also says they leave residues that can be tested for visually and chemically identifiable. Again, they did not test for it. And just put it in perspective, on a routine house fire, if we suspect even the slightest use of an accelerant, we're going to test for it when there's no fatalities, when there's very little property damage. So to not do it on this, there is absolutely no excuse. I can't drive that point home enough. 18.15 is analyze fuel source. All available fuel sources should be considered and eliminated until one fuel can be identified as meeting all the physical damage criteria. For example, if you find pulverized concrete, which we all know there was in all 3 buildings, there was pulverized concrete, that only fuels that can create seeded explosions should be considered. So they shouldn't be considering fires. They shouldn't be doing that. It doesn't account for pulverized concrete. They should only be considering exotic accelerants and explosives. 19.4.8.2.6, extremism. The terrorist may include fire as but one of a variety of weapons along with explosives used in furthering his or her goal. We know they used them in 93. Why would we not? We know they used them in 93. Why would we not test for him now? There was reports that day, multiple reports, which I'll get into in a second. So they could have put him in the basement. How do we know that unless we test for it? I mean, even if it is the terrorists that they claim they are, we need to test this. 14.3, preservation of the fire scene and physical evidence. We find the following. The cause of a fire explosion is not known until near the end of the investigation. The entire fire scene should be considered physical evidence and should be protected and preserved. It's just over and over. There's so many. You can go to our website, the Firefighters for 9/11 Truth. We have many more of these actual chapters that cover what they should have done that they did not do. So now, by their own admission, in all 3 building collapses, NIST refused to physically test, like Dr. Stephen Jones did, for explosives. This is just unbelievable. And here are their excuses, and I quote, "It is unlikely that 100 pounds of thermite or more could have been carried into World Trade Center 7 and placed around columns without being detected, either prior to September 11th or during that day." So again, I've been on a lot of fire scenes, and I've seen a lot of investigations, and why would we not test because something's hard to do? That's the exact reason you need to investigate it. If that was hard to do, we need to find out how they did it. And number 2, NIST excuse. In addition, no blast sounds were heard on the audio tracks of the video recordings during the collapse of World Trade Center 7 or reported by witnesses. That's one of their excuses why they didn't test. Well, apparently they didn't read Chapter 18. 18 is the general definition of explosions. Although an explosion is almost always accompanied by the production of a loud noise, the noise itself is not, in big bold letters, an essential element in the definition of an explosion. The generation and violent escape of gases are the primary criteria of an explosion. So that alone says they should have tested for it. But then we also, NIST has lied, and we can prove it. As soon as the new investigation happens, the evidence is out there for you to see right now. We have 118 first responders who reported explosions. We have the radio transmissions from FDNY members that are still recorded today that reported explosions. We have audio recordings. We have video recordings. I've personally talked to witnesses that heard them. So there's nothing short of saying they lied, and they need to be held accountable. And besides that, like I said, there is no excuse for not testing for explosives. And so at the very least, at the very best, even if you want to believe the official story, this was the most incompetent investigation of all time. And I've talked to a lot of investigators that were there, and I asked them the specific question, why did they refuse to test? They weren't the ones who refused, but NIST did. And they said, all we can say, all they can answer is incompetence, or they tell me to shut up. They cannot give me any reason that follows national standards. So, but the reality, after all the research everybody here and the incredible people we're in the room with today have done, the reality is it was a criminal investigation to cover up the crime. So, just to finish, I'd like to read a quote. This is from a retired, decorated FDNY lieutenant. Anyone who knows the fire service, he is a stud. He worked on Ladder Company 26, Rescue Company 3, Rescue Company 1 in his career. Anyone who knows, those are amazing companies. Here's his comment. Trade Tower 7 by itself is the smoking gun, not hit by an aircraft with only a few relatively small fires. It came down in a classic crimp and implosion, going straight into its basement, something only very precise demolitions can accomplish, which takes days, if not weeks, to prepare. The 9/11 Commission didn't even mention it, and FEMA actually stated they didn't know why it collapsed and left it at that. Brothers, I know that the above implications are hard, almost unthinkable, but the official explanation is utter nonsense, and 343 of our murdered brothers are crying out for justice. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Of interest that we'd find would be some of the parts of the plane embedded in the cars and in places in which you just wouldn't expect A part of the fins off the turbine, off of one of the engines, was actually found embedded into one of the engine blocks of one of the cars. But I think the most unique thing about this investigation has just been the unbelievable damage, the levels of heat in which, in certain instances, firearms were found in some of the vehicles that had completely melted down, and the temperatures that we were told were in the area of 3,000 to 4,000 degrees, that they melted a steel revolver down into a blob of metal again. These were some of the things. An engine block that was aluminum, and its pistons were cast iron, and other parts of the engine were steel, and the aluminum had actually melted around the steel and the iron and had dripped off like teardrops coming from the parts of the car. Fronts of automobiles that just melted away from the extreme heat, and yet the rest of the automobile was otherwise intact. And these steel automobiles that give people such belief in being secure and well made while they're driving 70 miles an hour on a highway are found to be little piles of tin cans after they've been struck by the immensity of this attack.
But breakable shards on the end here.
This 8-ton steel I-beam is 6 inches thick. It was selected to be preserved for future generations for the near-perfect horseshoe-like bend formed during the collapse.
I found it hard to believe that it actually bent because of the size of it and how there's no cracks in the iron. It bent without almost a single crack in it. It takes thousands of degrees to bend steel like this.
Typically you'd have buckling and tearing on the tension side, but there's no buckling at all.
This is a piece of steel that I found in the North Tower. It was down around basement 4. There was 6 levels of the World Trade Center. Of the box beam was melted like stalactites and stalagmites. So it was tremendous heat that melted these big, huge box beams where the steel was just dripping onto each other and stacking up. So I snapped a piece of it off just to show other people how hot the World Trade Center site was.
The Twin Towers using nothing but infrasound.
Really?
We were Eastern Bloc bringing down 25-story buildings using nothing but sound wave infrasound.
Good heavens.
And I did discuss this recent years with a Professor Francie, who remarked, and don't, this, that, and the other thing with respect to that 9/11 fast that we saw. And of course, we all know that Michael Meacher, who was a cabinet minister, was removed from office because he publicized the fact that he had read word for word what was to happen to the Twin Towers 3 years before the event.
3 years before the event?
3 years before the event. It was a well-planned thing. It was a well-known external skin. Each section weighing around 40 tons. It behaved exactly the way it should have done had it been influenced by infrasound, which is what I witnessed with the training that I was doing in the mid-60s, watching what the Brits, the Russians, and the Americans had been doing in Eastern Europe back in the late 50s. Look at it, you will see that the corner of this building, which is way distant from the Twin Towers positioning, 3 of its floors are torn apart on the corner. Now, there was no way that material from the Twin Towers could have flown out and struck that building.
Not at all.
So, in my discussions, arguments with Professor Francie, I said that as far as I was concerned, that infrasound influence upon those buildings was satellite-based. And, of course, his remark to me was, well, how could that be, Dean? He said, we couldn't have anything from space coming in by way of sound wave, infrasound or anything. I said, yeah, but it could be electromagnetic, and then it's transposing itself as it gets within our atmosphere. The thing here to understand, conventional thinking would have to have applied, but this building is the telltale that that was not struck by debris from one of the Twin Towers, and so what influenced it to be broken apart? And the thinking for me was that it had to have been some form of infrasound that was played on a large area in which the Twin Towers occupied. And Professor Francie was quite taken with that idea, went along with it, although one hasn't ever had the opportunity of proving such.
There's questions to ask like, why were over 1,000 bodies completely unrecoverable? From a gravity-driven collapse, we know that in an earthquake, people are dug up alive for days afterwards. Bodies are found in gravity-driven collapses. In this one, over 1,000 bodies, no trace whatsoever, no DNA trace. Where did they go?
Bombing the city.
Boom, boom, that's all I heard.
Because there were these explosions.
Boom, 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 that's all I heard.
One after the other. And the entire ferry terminal was shaking because there were these explosions, one after the other. And the entire ferry terminal was shaking. You know, this is a kilometre from ground zero. The whole building was shaking. People are screaming, and there's these explosions. I thought, the next one's going to hit the Staten Island ferry. We're gone, and it didn't.
Pouring out of the World Trade Center at this moment. Pouring out of the World Trade. Pouring out of the World Trade.
Also closed down. Let's go to 1010 Wins reporter Eileen LaPalmer. She is at City Hall. Eileen?
Well, Lee, I'm here live outside of City Hall. The entire, as you can imagine, it is absolute chaos here. The entire city has come to a standstill. Everyone just standing, looking at the smoke pouring out of the World Trade Center at this moment. There are certain people trying to call their families. All
it was exploding. Was it like, first was it like, and then it exploded?
Huge explosion. Everyone's running in the other direction.
And then the next thing I heard an explosion and the building from the top, the south building, just crumbled.
That's the building?
Yeah.
People don't understand. There may be more. Any one of these fucking buildings could blow up. This ain't done yet.
Nothing no more worse than this. You're in the building trying to help people, and it's exploding on the inside the building. So I don't think it can get any worse than this.
We were in the building for the third one. It collapsed. I was on this drive here for the other one.
Just trying to find anybody.
Mayday. Mayday, mayday. Command post, ladder 6. Mayday.
As fires rage nearby, the survivors in the ruins of Stairwell B come to realize that it may take days for rescue workers to reach them.
At one point, we had an explosion that came by that was pretty close, and it shook the stairway. At one point, we had an explosion that came by that was pretty close, and it shook the stairway.
Now, how did you get hurt, James?
I was, my assignment with Latitude 4, the company I'm assigned to, we were supposed to go into building number 2, the South Tower, and make our way into tower number 1, the North Tower. And we were caught in the collapse in the lobby of tower number 2, the South Tower.
Strange sounds, and the building starts imploding. One floor after one after one. Tremendous boom. And all that smoke that was in the air and the cross street, as the building imploded, it created a vacuum. And it starts sucking the smoke from the cross streets and in the air towards the core. Created a vacuum. And it starts sucking the smoke from the cross streets and in the air towards the core. Created a vacuum. And it starts sucking the smoke from the cross streets and in the air towards the core. And like they're bombing the financial area. I gotta go save my wife. And I can't rationalize it in my head. And the first time in my life I became angry. I mean, really, really, really angry.
Nobody knows but Jesus. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen.
I was out here. I was out here. I heard two explosions. I was out here. I was out here. I heard two explosions. I was out here. I was out here. I heard two explosions. I was out here. I was out here. I heard two explosions.
It's very important.
Why do you ignore the 9/11 truth movement?
I think
this is the most important thing that is going on in this country right now.
I would encourage people to go to our website and go to our September 11th show, where we had a very interesting,
we have an enormous explosion now in the remaining World Trade Tower center. It happened the same way. The explosion started high in the building and worked its way down. And I would be very anxious to hear in the future the forensics of this situation.
Result of something that was planned. It's not accidental that the first tower just happened to collapse and then the second tower just happened to collapse in exactly the same way. How they accomplished this, we don't know.
Nobody knows the trouble I've seen.
It's nothing short of a miracle. No scientific explanation, because when that building was coming down, the force of gravity was working against them and their odds of survival. So it's nothing short of a miracle.
Also taught us that most buildings are made of air. Most of the building is made of air.
Yeah, the reason why it went into free fall is, of course, it went into free fall. The building is empty, for God's sake. Ships are empty.
Right. Yeah. Most of the building is made of air.
Yeah, the reason why it went into free fall is, of course, it went into free fall. The building is empty, for God's sake.
Question when you saw those two giant towers collapse almost cleanly on themselves. Where did they go? I have read in some architecture article that they were made mostly of air. If you consider the space between the solid molecules, the steel, the concrete, the glass, the aluminum, there was a lot of air. It was mostly air actually, and they disappeared. And it's where did they go was part of the disbelief that I was feeling, because how you can make 200,000 tons of steel disappear, it's unbelievable.
It looks like a meteorite, and nobody knows which tower it came from, says Charles Gargano, vice chairman of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, which owns the hangar and the Trade Center site. Nobody knows which tower it came from, says Charles Gargano.
The rubble is this rock-like object that has come to be known as the meteorite.
It's this fused element of steel, molten steel and concrete and all of these things all fused by the heat into one single element.
And almost like a chunk of lava from Kilauea or Iceland, where they're very sharp but breakable shards on the
primary thing is, as the mayor just pointed out to you, is the black boxes. We're working with the city, but again, that's going to follow the search and rescue, ongoing intensive investigation. That's all I have at this time.
Can you say anything about the arrest in Florida and the seizure of a car in Florida and the seizure of a car in
We have a number of leads that we're running around the country. A number of these, I'm not going to get into specifics other than it's my understanding we did detain some individuals over in New Jersey. Essentially, we are finding out that that is not all that relevant at this particular point in time, but I'm going to limit my comments. That is going to any of the investigators.
I don't know where they are. I don't know where they are.
To the chase, he reveals Mike Ballone's claim that he saw a black box being recovered by Cloonan's FBI colleagues.
He visibly saw one of them. His partner said they've got 2 more to give 3 out of the 4 black boxes. And we've also talked to an airline investigative specialist who says never in the annals of history have they ever found where they couldn't at least find the black boxes. You guys, everybody at this site went through that debris with such a fine-tooth comb. They were finding bone fragments the size of nail clippings and DNA matching it. Yet we're told the black boxes, for the first time in history, destroyed, gone, never found them. I'm expected to believe that.
All right, well,
you believe they?
I don't know where they are. 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 I don't know where they are.
At that base, obviously.
I caught out of my eye an airplane. And I turned to Pat, my pilot, and I said, Pat, Jesus Christ, I said, there's a second plane crashing. And then as I turned back to the left again, I realized how close it was coming to us. I started to yell at Pat to climb, because I felt it was going to impact our aircraft. So we climbed.
Make sure you guys know there was not a secondary explosion. It was another plane flying into that tower.
10-4, car 3, you read direct on that. That was not a secondary explosion. It was a second plane that ran into the tower.
This was a South Korean military plane that exploded directly into the... This was a South Korean military plane that... This was a South Korean military plane that exploded the tower. Special be advised, rescue reports was a U.S. Air 737 commercial airliner that crashed. A U.S. Air 737 commercial airliner that crashed into the South Tower.
10-4, okay, car 3, read direct on that.
Okay, does anybody know where that plane came from? Aircraft, it was a commercial airliner. It was most likely a United Airlines. Most likely a United Airlines 237. Let's go.
You know, at the 9/11 hearings, Condoleezza Rice is asked about this presidential briefing, and she says we didn't think it had anything to do with anything specific. It seemed to be just some general thing that we already knew, that bin Laden had some plans to attack the United States, and we didn't consider it all that significant. But you point out something in the book I thought was quite interesting, I personally hadn't seen before, which is in something called the SEIB, the Senior Executive Intelligence Brief, which is essentially normally, if I understand correctly, more or less what's in the presidential brief, but it goes to many more people. That whole memo on bin Laden has been taken out. Well, if they consider it so not of any great significance one way or the other, why on earth would they take it out?
One explanation would be that they didn't want there to be a broadcast of the possibility that we might be under specific threat of terrorists using airplanes. Part of the broader strategy of reducing the people in the United States' knowledge and anxiety about what might be occurring. Or it could have just been a judgment by the people who convert the presidential daily briefing, which goes to a very small group, into the executive briefing, which goes to several hundred, if not thousand people, that this was not an appropriate item to make as broadly available.
Sources said there had been no credible claims for the joint attacks. Enforcement sources said there had been no credible claims for the joint attacks.
The vice president, who you may remember, was placed in charge of a domestic terrorism study group within the White House to monitor and develop plans to deal with a catastrophe of just this kind.
And his regime. A 76-page white paper circulating for a year and arguing for an aggressive U.S. foreign policy suddenly gained new relevance.
In the blueprint, it says the process of transformation is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. Was 9/11 your Pearl Harbor?
The process of transformation is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. Was 9/11 your Pearl Harbor?
In the blueprint, it says the process of transformation is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. Was 9/11 your Pearl Harbor?
The process of transformation is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. Was 9/11 your Pearl Harbor?
I've never had to issue a hijack squawk to an aircraft. I mean, we can issue an emergency code if we think the aircraft is having an issue, and what they do when they squawk, there's 3 particular codes that they can squawk, and it's basically emergency radio failure hijack, and it actually tags up on other controller scopes, and also scopes down the lower 48, if like at the command center, anybody, probably the military. I can't really speak to how their equipment works, but it just kind of tags them up a little bit differently. So it's a more pronounced target on the scope. So I've never had to do it before. I never had to do it after that. It was a strange request at the time. I never read it in the books where you had to do that. I've never, you know, we wouldn't necessarily ever issue that code to an aircraft because the way I look at it, it's not ours to issue, it's the pilot's to issue because it's a very serious code. So the 7500 squawk was the hijack code. Was actually a supervisor came down and said we need to have the Korean Air squawk 7500, and I said, well, I didn't really think it was the right thing to do. So they actually left and regrouped and talked about it, and I had my opinions of why it wasn't. But then later I was ordered to do it.
And what were your thoughts? Why did you not want to do that?
We'd already had some miscommunication with the military that morning. There'd already been some threats to shoot down some aircraft. One that I was particularly working, there were probably others that happened to, that if they didn't follow whatever air traffic commands that we issued at the time, that they would be shot down. And I had an aircraft that was just south of Anchorage. On his way in, he was told to land at Anchorage. And at 40 miles south of Anchorage, I was told to turn him or that he would be shot down. And I was realizing there was a lot of miscommunications with the civilian sector and the military sector. There were fighters with this Korean Air, and with the kind of communications that occur, or breakdowns we'd say, occasionally that occur between the civilians and the military. My first thought, and after, I guess you'd say 19 years of experience, I knew how the military operates to an extent, and I thought, well, what if the guy's trigger happy? That's not a bad thing. You know, that's their job, and that's not my job, is to destroy aircraft, but that's theirs. And if they saw this code, I was afraid that it would, well, I was very afraid. I was more than afraid. It was probably the worst thing I ever had to do in my life, to issue the code.
Do you know who gave the order from the FAA in Washington, D.C.?
I think I do, but I'm not sure how it was derived. I don't know who told the person. I'm not sure if the person that gave that order, headquarters is actually, it was just, I believe, if I'm hearing this or I'm understanding it right, these instructions were coming for what they called headquarters, which is the Traffic Management Control Center in the lower 48. It's pretty much the whole command center or traffic management system for all of the U.S. airspace. I was actually assigned traffic management locally at the center at that time. I was a traffic management coordinator, but I just happened to work traffic also. So I interact with these people, and as far as who made the decision, I don't know, but I do understand a little bit of why. I understand why they wanted to do this, and my thoughts, you know, I explained about what my concerns were, but I believe the concerns of management were more, they wanted everybody to see the aircraft. They wanted the military to be aware of it. They wanted this, you know, this aircraft to brighten up on their scope, so to speak, or become very prominent so they could find it and track it. And I thought in the back of my mind, that must be why they're wanting to do it, but it's really not the right thing to do. So yes, it came from the Traffic Management Center, I think is what they were calling headquarters, from the best I could tell. I never asked anybody. I really didn't want to know at the time.
Do you think the order came from headquarters, what you're referring to as headquarters, or do you think it originated farther up the chain of command than from them?
What little bit I've read, and I haven't listened to tapes, I just read a few logs that were publicly available, and I really can't determine who gave the order. So it could have been within the headquarters, it could have been outside. Everything would be speculation for me, but from what I read, it almost looked like it was determined locally at what we call headquarters, but there could have been outside, you know, pressure to have this aircraft squawk a code that would be recognizable, where he would actually be more prominent on displays for, you know, any military personnel or any personnel at any point that had access to the radar data we were looking at. So, yeah.
You were a commercial pilot before you were an air traffic controller for 25 years. Can you ever imagine a circumstance where it would seem appropriate for an air traffic controller to order a jet, a jet full of passengers to squawk that they have hijackers on board, especially in light of the fact that they're being escorted by F-15s?
No, it's absolutely, that was a problem I was having with it. I could not fathom any scenario that would really warrant that to happen. Management, on the other hand, I'm not sure what their experience is. The people, you know, calling the shots, we'll say. I don't know what experience they had, but I have ground experience, and that's what I was drawn from as a pilot, as a controller for a while. Understand interactions between military and civilian sectors, and how breakdowns can occur and accidents can happen. That's what I was looking at, the whole picture. I wasn't, you know, removed from it. I guess if I was far removed from the situation, I might have reacted differently or wanted it to happen as a convenience method for other people to see it. But no, there's no reason why a controller would ever want to issue that I can come up with. You might could ask a dozen controllers and somebody might say yes, but it really made no sense to me.
Looking back now, nearly 10 years, why have you decided to speak out about this now?
It's always something that's kind of haunted me, and it's the reason that it's a kind of a haunting issue is I've had aircraft that I've been working before that have had a lot of issues that have crashed. We'll say that I've had pilots, you know, I've heard screams going as they've been going down, you might say, in the past. But all those were beyond my control. I didn't issue direct orders. I didn't tell someone to do something that could result in the destruction of their aircraft. My job was for safety and to make sure the flights were moved safely and efficiently. That's what an air traffic controller does. In my opinion, what I had to do was something that could have resulted in a big accident. And that's why I actually did not issue it when I was first told to. There was a delay in the time that the order was issued to have this aircraft squawk the code, and it occurred because I refused to do it. And I explained to the supervisors that were there why I was explaining to do it. And when they came back, I was ordered to do it. I realized somebody was going to do it. I didn't like people doing my dirty work, and I knew they were going to get somebody to do it. So under the threats, I did it. And that's why I've been, it's just a haunting thing. So occasionally, once a year, I'll go search and see if anybody even cared about what happened to that flight. So.
Well, thank you very much, Rick Wilder. Thank you for speaking with me about this.
Thank you.
And thank you for tuning in and for watching. Good night.